You make too much for what you actually do. That was the very first sentence my new boss said to me. No handshake, no hello. Just those words, tossed across the desk like a used napkin. Have you ever had a boss who didn't see your worth, who underestimated you or treated you like you didn't matter? If yes, what did you do? Share your story in the comments. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. My name's Mark Daniels. I'm 46 years old, and I've been with Hawthorne Tech longer than most of the people there have had a career. 2 decades. I've seen 5 CEOs come and go, sat through 3 buyouts, and helped lead the company through the 2008 crash without laying off a single engineer. I wasn't flashy. I didn't wear expensive watches or talk over people in meetings, but I got things done, and I made sure others could too. I was director of product operations. I built the systems that kept things moving, from idea to prototype to launch. I was the one they called when a deadline got tight or a major client changed specs at the last second. I wasn't the loudest guy in the room, but I was the guy who knew where everything lived and how to keep it from falling apart. Then came Jeremy Lang, new VP, fresh from some hot startup that burned fast and bright before crashing out. He wore suits that looked expensive but never quite fit, and he talked like a walking TED Talk, synergy, alignment, culture shift, that kind of thing. And most of all, he wanted to impress the CEO, like it was some game of who could cut costs fastest. So he looked at me, a quiet guy in his 40s, not some young hustler with shiny buzzwords and endless energy drinks. He saw my salary on a spreadsheet, didn't bother to ask what I actually did, and decided I was a waste. Starting next pay cycle, you'll see a 25% reduction, he said, eyes barely leaving his tablet. I could have argued. I had data, proof, performance metrics going back 10 years. I could have reminded him I was the one who saved our biggest client account during the supply chain mess in 2020. But I didn't. I sat there, nodded once, and said, "All right," because in that moment I realized something. He didn't see me, not really. I was just numbers to him. Legacy weight, something he thought he could trim to look good in front of the people upstairs. What he didn't know was that people like me? We don't shout, we don't storm out, we take notes. And the thing about systems, the ones that keep a company alive, is that when you mess with the guy who built them, you'd better know where all the wires go. He didn't. I walked out of that office with my expression calm, my hands steady. But something in me had shifted, not anger, not even disappointment. Something clearer, lighter almost. You spend 20 years holding up a building, and one day someone walks in and tells you the floor under you isn't worth keeping. You realize real quick, maybe it's time to stop carrying the weight for people who don't even notice you're the one holding the beams. Back at my desk, I didn't send any angry emails, didn't text my wife or call my old boss. I sat down, opened a spreadsheet, and began making a new kind of list. I knew what Jeremy didn't: the product pipelines, the client renewals, the vendor partnerships, even the internal dashboards. Most of it was built by me, with a handful of engineers I trusted like family. Not because I demanded credit, but because someone had to build the foundation. Everyone else was too busy chasing meetings and buzzwords. I was the guy who stayed late to make sure the product didn't ship with a bug that could cost millions. The guy who took the 11 p.m. call from the East Coast distributor when no one else picked up. So, yeah, maybe I wasn't cutting edge, but the system's still standing. They had my fingerprints on every bolt. Jeremy's plan was simple: cut my pay, look good to the CEO, and make room for a new crew of younger, cheaper, louder hires who would energize the department. I could see it from a mile away. They wanted flash. They thought the roots were dead weight. That's the problem with people who've only seen the surface. They never think to ask what's keeping the lights on underneath. In the weeks that followed, the changes started small. A team meeting I usually ran was suddenly moved to a more streamlined format, led by someone new, someone who hadn't been at the company long enough to know which projects were real and which ones were just PowerPoint vapor. My access to certain financial reports was quietly revoked. I found out when the tool just stopped letting me in. And then there was the new guy. Fresh out of a Bay Area consultancy, wore sneakers with suits and smiled like every conversation was a pitch deck. They gave him the title of Product Optimization Strategist. No one knew what that meant, but he started sitting in on my calls, asking odd questions about legacy code and redundant workflows. I didn't fight it. I answered plainly. I even pointed him to a few process docs I'd written years ago. He thanked me like I was an intern fetching coffee. That was the third mistake they made. The first was assuming I was overpaid. The second was underestimating the reach I had. The third? Thinking I wasn't paying attention. Let me tell you something. When you've been in a company long enough, you learn the difference between noise and signal. You learn how decisions ripple. I watched as Jeremy shuffled teams around, canceled long-standing vendor contracts to save costs, and started prioritizing vanity projects over the core product roadmap. I watched the internal review meetings go from actual planning sessions to 45-minute ego contests where no one said anything real. And I stayed quiet, but I also stayed busy. I started backing up documentation to a private archive. Nothing confidential, just processes I had created, frameworks I'd written, flowcharts I'd spent late nights updating. I didn't need to take anything that wasn't mine. The value wasn't in the files, it was in the know-how. I simply organized it, for clarity, for safety. Meanwhile, I checked in with a few of the folks I'd mentored over the years. Some were still in the company, others had moved on but stayed close. I wasn't recruiting, not yet. But I was taking stock, listening, feeling the ground under my feet. One morning, I got a message from Dylan. He was our lead on client services, someone I'd hired back when he was green and eager but smart. Sharp instincts. He asked if I had time to talk. "Something feels off," he wrote. I met him in the back stairwell, where no one ever went unless there was a fire drill. "They're starting to ask questions about the Mitchell account," he said. "The one you built the workflow for back in 19. Jeremy's people are thinking about streamlining it, but I don't think they understand how delicate it is." I nodded. The Mitchell account wasn't just another client. They were our largest long-term partner, and the reason our East Coast branch stayed open during the slump. Their system was custom, complicated, and sensitive. You didn't touch it unless you knew exactly what you were doing. "Thanks for the heads up," I said. "Let me know if they start moving anything." I left that stairwell with a plan. Not revenge, not some dramatic takedown, just preparation. See, when you've held a system together with duct tape, goodwill, and 3 2 a.m. code rewrites, you don't just walk away and let it collapse. You build an off-ramp. A quiet one. By the end of that week, I had mapped out every mission-critical touchpoint tied to the legacy systems I managed. I wasn't sabotaging anything. I was just making sure that if, or rather when, things started to break, there would be a record of how to fix them. Or, more accurately, a record of what Jeremy ignored. He thought I was fading into the background. That's what happens when people think power is about noise. They miss the guy who's been quietly holding the walls up. And they never realize that when that guy stops holding, the whole thing starts to lean. I didn't need to push it, I just needed to wait. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. The Mitchell account, our biggest client, started sending confused emails about delays in product testing. Then it was mismatched timelines between engineering updates and what client services had promised. Nothing huge at first, just the kind of small glitches that make clients nervous, the kind that make them wonder, do these people still have it together? I watched it all from the same desk they forgot to reassign after slashing my pay. No one said anything to me directly. Maybe they figured I was too checked out to notice. But I noticed. I always notice. Jeremy didn't. He was too busy hosting innovation huddles with his new hires, talking about reframing legacy workflows, like the company's actual heartbeat wasn't still running on the same systems I'd built 10 years ago. One Friday morning, I got a calendar invite. Subject: Mitchell Strategy Session. Organizer: Jeremy Lang. Attendees: 12 people. Location: main conference room. I wasn't on the list. Now, here's the thing about leaving people out of a room. You better be sure they're not the person who designed the room in the first place. Because while they were in there talking slides and selling buzzwords to each other, the real foundation was already groaning under the weight of their shortcuts. Later that afternoon, I caught wind that Jeremy had suggested flattening the Mitchell account management structure, cutting 2 senior engineers and merging the service queue with a generic client support team. One size fits all. Except it wasn't. The Mitchell account ran on customized architecture that couldn't just be handed off to anyone with a headset and a checklist. And Mitchell noticed. On Monday, their VP of Operations, Jason, sent an email directly to Jeremy and copied the CEO. His tone was measured but firm. He asked why their account had seen 3 different points of contact in the last month, why response times had doubled, why internal change logs showed new hands accessing their systems without any formal authorization. I didn't see the email, of course, but I heard the whispers. And I saw the way Jeremy walked past my desk that day, head down, face tight, not a single word. That night, I stayed an hour late. I opened my private archive and checked all the workflows I'd documented for Mitchell over the years. Nothing had been tampered with, yet. But access logs showed 2 unfamiliar usernames poking around systems they had no business in. One of them belonged to that new product optimization strategist, the one who still called me Mike, even after 2 months on the job. I took a deep breath, leaned back in my chair, and stared at the ceiling tiles. This wasn't sabotage, it was negligence, plain and simple, and it was going to cost the company dearly. But here's the part they didn't expect. I wasn't going to blow the whistle. Not yet. Because the truth was, the people who needed to see it, really see it, were already starting to notice. The clients, the engineers, the folks who had been in the trenches long enough to know when something smelled off. The cracks were showing, and the only thing more dangerous than a broken system is pretending it still works. Later that week, Dylan messaged again. Mitchell's not happy. I heard they're considering pulling Phase 2 unless we fix this mess ASAP. Phase 2. That was the $1 million contract, the one that secured our next fiscal quarter, the one that Jeremy had been dangling in front of the board to justify all his cost-cutting brilliance. If that fell apart, the whole performance would come undone. I didn't reply to Dylan, not right away. I knew he'd done what he could. But there was a bigger lesson coming, and some lessons only hit when you let gravity do its thing. Meanwhile, I kept showing up. Every morning at 8:15 I sat at my desk, logged in, and did the job they still technically paid me for, reduced salary and all. I handled the small tasks they tossed my way, reapproved workflows I'd already designed, answered questions they should have known better than to ask. And all the while, I listened. I watched. I waited. Then came the meeting. Emergency call, all hands, no agenda listed. That's never a good sign. Jeremy opened with the usual, "Thanks, everyone, for being here on short notice." His shirt was rumpled, his tie was off. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a few days. "As some of you are aware," he continued, "we've hit a few operational snags related to client servicing, particularly with our long-term partners." Snags, that's what he called them. "We're working closely with the leadership team to realign our internal processes and ensure client confidence moving forward." Leadership team. That didn't include me anymore. But here's the irony. Half of that room was filled with people I had trained. People who were now quietly looking in my direction for answers. Jeremy clicked through a few slides, charts showing downward trends he blamed on transition friction and legacy drag. The buzzwords were back, the answers weren't. One of the engineers raised a hand. "Is it true Mitchell has paused their expansion plans with us?" Jeremy's jaw clenched. "They've requested more time to evaluate ongoing performance, but we're confident in our ability to deliver." "Lieutenant," I didn't need to hear anything else. I stood up, not fast, not dramatic, just enough that heads turned. I walked out without a word. And for the first time in weeks, I smiled, because I knew what was coming. Not disaster, not chaos, truth. Clients were starting to ask questions. The CEO was about to see through the show. And Jeremy, the man who cut my salary to make himself look good, was about to find out that when you treat people like furniture, don't be surprised when the floor gives out. And I hadn't even made my move yet. 2 days after I walked out of that meeting, everything changed. Not because of some big announcement, not because Jeremy finally realized the damage he'd caused. Number it started with a simple phone call, one no one saw coming. Not even me. It was 8:07 a.m. I had just finished pouring coffee into the chipped blue mug I kept at my desk, the one with the company logo from 15 years ago, back when we still printed mission statements on mouse pads. My inbox was already flashing, but it wasn't an internal request this time. Subject line, "Call from Mitchell, need your insight." From Jason Bright, Vice President Operations, Mitchell Industries. For a moment, I just stared at the screen. Then I clicked it open. "Mark, I know you're not the main point of contact anymore, but I'm hoping you can give me 5 minutes of context on a few process changes we're seeing on our end. Something doesn't feel right, and I trust your judgment. Best, Jason." I leaned back, holding the edge of my mug like it was a steering wheel. Jason wasn't just any client. He was sharp, observant, and didn't like surprises. We'd built the Mitchell pipeline together after all, he on their side, me on ours. We'd spent late nights aligning timelines, smoothing handoffs between departments and building trust. So if he was reaching out now, it meant one thing. He was losing confidence. I didn't reply by email. I picked up the phone and called him directly. The line rang twice. "Mark," Jason answered, like he'd been waiting. "Morning," I said, my voice steady. "Saw your message. What's going on?" There was a pause, brief but heavy. "Something's off," he said. "We've had 3 system rollouts this quarter. All 3 were late. 2 had configuration errors. And last week, we were told your team was shifting toward automation." But no one could explain what that actually meant. I didn't say anything, not yet. "I know you're probably being asked to stay quiet," Jason continued, "but I need to know who's actually managing our process now. Because whoever it is doesn't seem to understand how the system works." He was right. The so-called automation strategy Jeremy's team had pushed was a patchwork of repurposed workflows, outdated templates, and AI dashboards that didn't integrate with Mitchell's infrastructure. It wasn't just risky. It was reckless. And now Jason could see the seams. "I'm not officially tied to your account anymore," I said. "But I can tell you this. Some of the new changes weren't designed with your setup in mind. And I don't think the team handling it fully understands how interconnected your processes are." He exhaled sharply. That's what I was afraid of. "What's your next move?" I asked. Jason paused. "I've got a call with your CEO tomorrow morning. I don't want to go nuclear, but if this continues, we may need to reevaluate our contract." Translation: if the CEO doesn't fix this fast, Mitchell walks. That call ended with a promise. Jason would give it 48 hours before making anything official. A courtesy. One I didn't take lightly. I hung up, sat back, and looked around the office. Everything felt oddly still. Phones ringing, people chatting, but underneath it all, pressure. Like the moment before a storm when the air goes thick and the sky forgets how to breathe. And Jeremy. He had no clue what was coming. He was in the glass-walled conference room, laughing with someone, probably spinning his next great pitch. He didn't see the tension, didn't hear the cracks. That afternoon, word spread that the CEO had called an emergency executive session for the next morning. No one knew why, but I had a pretty good guess. At 9 a.m. sharp, they filed into the boardroom upstairs. All the directors, the top VPs, and Jeremy. I wasn't invited, of course not. But someone on the inside, someone I'd worked with for years, sent me a quick message after. "Mitchell's threatening to suspend Phase 2. CEO is not happy. Jeremy's blaming the old infrastructure. Said we were cleaning up legacy mess. Thought you'd want to know." Legacy mess. That phrase hit harder than I expected. Not because it was wrong, but because it was lazy, convenient. A way to point fingers at people who built things with care, just so someone else could tear them down without understanding what they were breaking. But something told me this time it wasn't going to work. Because Jason wasn't staying quiet anymore. By the end of the day, an internal memo leaked. Mitchell had issued a formal notice to pause their second-phase contract pending a strategic review of service continuity. That's code for, "We're not walking yet, but we're close." The memo didn't name names, but everyone knew where the finger pointed. And suddenly, all the energy in the office shifted. People started whispering again. Only now, it wasn't about me being phased out. It was about Jeremy, about whether his big ideas had just tanked our biggest account, about how the one person who actually understood the system wasn't being asked back into the room. That night, I stayed even later than usual. I opened the archive one more time. Not to add anything, just to review, to remind myself of what I'd built, the tools, the guardrails, the small things that made the big things run, the systems Jeremy thought he could replace with dashboards and dollar signs. It wasn't pride, it was memory, proof. At 10:12 p.m., I shut down my computer and walked past the darkened offices, the flickering overhead lights humming like tired thoughts. The company felt different now, not broken, but waiting. Like it finally realized it had leaned too far over the edge, and now it was searching for a way back. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew this much. The moment Jeremy cut my pay to impress the CEO, he made one fatal mistake. He forgot the client wasn't just buying our product, they were buying trust. And trust doesn't come from cutting corners. It comes from knowing who holds the map when the road gets rough. And me? I still had the map. I'd always had it. The next morning started like any other. I got to the office early, as always, just in time to see Jeremy rush past reception, his jaw clenched tight and tie hanging loose like a man halfway through losing control. People were watching him now, not with respect, but with unease. The way you watch someone who once barked orders and now can't remember which hallway leads to which conference room. Something had shifted, and not just with the Mitchell account. By noon, the memo hit my inbox. Not from Jeremy, from the CEO himself. Subject: Immediate Leadership Review, Product Operations. It was short, clinical. Just a few paragraphs explaining that due to recent client concerns and operational misalignment, executive oversight for product operations would be temporarily reassigned to the office of the CEO. All cost-cutting initiatives were to be frozen. Any further client-facing changes required direct approval. In other words, Jeremy was officially benched. The hallway chatter exploded. Slack messages started pinging like popcorn in a microwave. But I just kept typing, finishing up the documentation request that had landed on my desk that morning. Then, around 3:45 p.m., I got the message from the CEO's executive assistant. Mark Dash, the CEO would like a brief one-on-one with you. 4 p.m. boardroom, just you. I stared at it for a second, not surprised, not nervous either, just ready. At 4 o'clock sharp, I walked into the boardroom. No tie, no show, just the same calm I'd carried since the day Jeremy decided I was no longer worth what I'd built. The CEO stood as I entered. First time he'd ever done that. "Mark," he said, offering a hand. "Thanks for coming." I shook it. Firm, quiet. "I've spent the last 48 hours reviewing the Mitchell account," he said. "Your name came up, a lot." I didn't say anything. "They trust you," he continued. "Said you were the reason they stayed as long as they did." Still, I waited. I'll be honest. I didn't realize how much of our infrastructure runs on your work, or how much we've been relying on systems that no one else even fully understands. I finally spoke. They understand them. They just never asked. He nodded slowly, like someone who'd finally seen the wiring behind the walls and realized it wasn't magic. It was effort. Years of it. "I'm stepping in," he said. "Jeremy's being moved to an advisory role. Temporary, but it's more of a formality at this point, the board's aware." I kept my expression neutral, but inside, something heavy began to lift. "Look," he said, leaning forward, "I can't undo what's already happened, but I want to offer you a choice. Full reinstatement. Your original salary, your title, or something more, if you're willing to help rebuild." I thought about it. About the years I'd spent holding the place together. About the quiet afternoons when no one saw the fires I put out before they spread. About the moment I realized I didn't need recognition. I just needed to be respected. "I'll rebuild," I said, "but on one condition." "Anything," he said. "No more pretending legacy means outdated. We build forward with what works, not just with what looks good in a pitch deck." He smiled. "Deal." And that was it. In the weeks that followed, everything changed. Jeremy was quietly removed from his position. No big announcement, just a line in the org chart that disappeared. Last I heard, he was offered a lateral role in a different region. No direct reports, no real power. Word is he declined. Mitchell renewed their contract, not just Phase 2, Phase 3 as well. Jason called me personally to say thanks. It wasn't about systems, he told me, it was about trust, and you never lost ours. Internally, the company began stabilizing. The engineers stopped updating their resumes. The hallway jokes started coming back. People began to breathe again. And slowly, the old system started evolving. Not erased, not replaced, just updated with the care of people who finally understood what held them together in the first place. I didn't ask for a promotion, didn't want one, but the CEO gave me a new title anyway, Head of Systems Integrity. Not flashy, not loud, but honest. It fit. A few months later, during a quarterly review, the CEO stood in front of the company and said something I'll never forget. Sometimes the strongest systems aren't the newest. They're the ones built with patience, care, and a kind of quiet brilliance we forget to appreciate until they're gone. He looked in my direction when he said it. I didn't nod, didn't smile, I just listened. That was enough. Now, when I walk through the office, people look up. Not because I have a title, not because I'm loud, but because they know, when things break, I'll be there. Not to clean up a mess I didn't make, but to make sure the mess never happens again. Legacy isn't about clinging to the past. It's about building something that lasts, even when the people who benefit from it forget how it got there. I used to think keeping your head down was the only way to survive. Now I know better. Sometimes standing tall, quietly, steadily, without apology, is how you outlast them all. And this time, I wasn't just standing, I was leading.